I had to go on a business trip, and as the miles stretched on, fatigue and hunger began to creep in. I decided to pull into a small, almost deserted town that I had stumbled upon. The place had an eerie stillness to it, but I was too tired to care. I drove up to a cafe, only to find it closed. Determined to find something to eat, I wandered around, noticing that all the shops were shut down. The only place that seemed open was a small market. It was weird, I thought. It was Monday, and yet nothing was open. I decided to go inside, thinking I could at least grab some fresh fruit. As I entered, I immediately noticed the unsettling silence. Nobody greeted me, and the air felt thick with unease. I gathered a few items and approached the cashier, trying to make some small talk. However, when I spoke, the cashier recoiled in fear, his eyes widening as if he had seen a ghost. He hurriedly took my money, his hands trembling, and gave me my change with a hurried, almost desperate motion. Without uttering a single word, he then walked out of the store, leaving me standing there in bewilderment. This strange encounter left me feeling deeply uneasy, but exhaustion weighed heavily on me, and I was too tired to dwell on it. I just took my bag and walked out into the dimly lit street. I drove a little further into the town and then realized that the streets were eerily empty. There were no other cars in sight, and the few people who were out were shuffling along with their heads down, as if weighed down by an invisible burden. My windows were down, and instead of the usual bustling town noises, I only heard the haunting sound of the wind whispering through the empty streets. It was as if the whole town itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. Eventually, I found an inn to stay at for the night. The woman at the front desk reacted similarly to the cashier when I spoke to her, her eyes darting around nervously, and she quickly handed me the keys to my room, making sure to avoid eye contact. Her hands were shaking slightly, and she fumbled with her necklace before hurriedly retreating to a back room. The unsettling atmosphere of the town seemed to permeate every corner. I grabbed my keys, feeling a little annoyed by the behavior of the people in this town. I settled down into my room for the night, hoping to get some much-needed sleep before my meeting tomorrow. That night, I experienced for the first time ever a terrifying case of sleep paralysis. A tall, slender figure stood ominously in the corner of my room. It inched its way closer, each movement slow and deliberate, until it was right beside my bed. Its shadow seemed to stretch across the room, engulfing everything in a suffocating darkness. The figure bent down to my ear and whispered, "Shh," before disappearing. The feeling of this thing's breath was icy. It burned as the cold air touched my skin and trickled down my neck. The sensation lingered there for a while, leaving a chilling imprint that felt like frostbite. My body was paralyzed, and I could only watch in horror as the figure vanished into the shadows, leaving an eerie silence in its wake. Finally, I was able to get up and move. I was shaken by the experience, my heart pounding in my chest. The room felt colder, and I could still feel the lingering touch of that icy breath. I checked every corner of the room, but there was no sign of the figure. Sleep was impossible after that. I went to confront the woman at the desk about what had happened and to demand a change of room. My fear caused my voice to rise, but she immediately retreated, her eyes wide with alarm, and grabbed a pen and paper from the counter. With trembling hands, she wrote, "Don't talk." Confused and frustrated, I read the note and looked at her. my patience wearing thin. "What on earth is going on here?" I demanded, rather than asked, my voice echoing in the empty lobby. "I have to be up early and I can't even get some sleep in here. I just want my room changed," I said angrily, my words slicing through the tense silence. She continued frantically writing, her eyes darting around as if expecting something dreadful to happen at any moment. "Please, stop talking. The town was cursed many years ago by a woman who was claimed to be a witch. Before they burned her, she put a curse on the town. Whoever shall speak shall be punished. You have done a lot of talking." The urgency in her scribbled words was palpable, and the fear in her eyes mirrored my own growing anger. Rage and skepticism washed over me. I told her she was full of it and that I would be leaving first thing in the morning and filing a complaint. She simply wrote down, "Good." Fuming, I went back to my room, determined to get some rest before leaving this cursed place. As I lay down, I felt something press against my mattress, as if someone had laid down beside me. Turning to look, I saw a woman sitting at the foot of my bed. Her eyes were pitch black, devoid of any emotion, and her long, greasy white hair hung in tangled strands, giving her an eerie and unsettling appearance. Her skin was pale and almost translucent, making her look ghostly in the dim light of the room. She smiled wide at me, revealing razor-sharp teeth that gleamed menacingly. "Shh," she whispered, her voice a chilling hiss as she leaned over me. My body was frozen with fear, unable to move or scream. Her breath was cold against my skin, and I could feel the malevolence radiating from her. I let out a scream of terror as the witch slowly twisted her long, sharp fingernail into my chest, the pain searing through me as her malevolent grin grew wider. The air around me seemed to thicken, and a sense of impending doom enveloped me as I realized I was trapped in this nightmare. I could feel her penetrating my skin as I groaned out in agony. With a desperate burst of energy, I leapt out of bed and struggled to run to the door. I felt her cold, bony hands grab at me, her nails scraping my skin, but I barely made it, bolting out of the hotel room. As I ran past the front desk, I noticed a lady there looking horrified, hiding under the desk. Her eyes were wide with fear. I dashed to my car and sped away from the town. The image of the witch's malevolent grin burned into my memory. When I finally arrived at my meeting, I was late, disheveled, and improperly dressed. My clothes were wrinkled, and I had a wild, frantic look in my eyes. The meeting was canceled, and they told me to reschedule in the upcoming months. The disappointment was palpable, but the terror I had just escaped overshadowed everything else. Returning home, I broke the bad news to my wife, but didn't mention the strange town or the eerie encounter. I vowed never to go back. The memory of the witch's cold, bony hands and her malevolent grin haunted my thoughts, but I couldn't bring myself to tell anyone. Years later, I finally mustered the courage to talk to my wife about it. As I explained, my wife asked the name of the town. "I think it was something like Edgewood," I said. She looked it up only to find that such a place never existed. This discovery sent chills down my spine, making me question my own sanity. "I have the scar," I said. showing my wife the scar on my chest from where the witch had dug her nail into me. The scar was a constant reminder of that night, a physical proof that something terrible had happened. This revelation altered my reality and left me deeply troubled. I didn't understand it. I had physical proof, and I remembered it all too well. The scar throbbed sometimes, as if the witch's curse still lingered. My wife believes me, but she says maybe I got the name wrong, but I'm sure I didn't. I went to therapy, thinking it would help me clear some of this up, but the experience still haunts me. Every night, I dream of that town, the witch, and her sinister smile. It seems like a strange nightmare, yet I know it was real. The line between reality and illusion blurred, leaving me in a perpetual state of unease, forever haunted by that witch of Edgewood. It was a crisp autumn evening when my friends and I decided to go camping in the remote woods for the weekend. We were all excited to escape the city and immerse ourselves in the tranquility of nature. By the time we arrived, night had already fallen, so we hurriedly set up our tents and lit a fire, and the flickering flames casting long dancing shadows around our campsite. As we sat around the fire, we began telling ghost stories, each one more chilling than the last. The crackling of the fire and the eerie shadows it created added to the spooky atmosphere. The air was thick with a sense of foreboding, and even the simplest of sounds seemed amplified in the stillness of the night. We roasted hot dogs for dinner, but the taste was overshadowed by the spine-tingling tales we shared. Around midnight, we decided to put out the fire and get ready to turn in for the night, eager to wake up early for a hike the next morning. Just as we were about to retreat to our separate tents, we heard a rustling noise coming from the bushes. "Did you hear that?" Henson asked, his voice tinged with unease. "Yeah, I did," I replied, my heart beginning to race. "It's Rabbit," Bruce retorted dismissively as he walked back to his tent. Henson and I stood there for a moment, scanning the trees but saw nothing. Reluctantly, we turned and started walking back towards our tents. Suddenly, a low, guttural growl echoed out of the forest, making every hair on my body stand on end. I spun around, but still saw nothing. That's when Bruce turned his flashlight on, and there, in the beam of the light, I saw them. A pair of glowing eyes, staring back at us from the bushes, unblinking and menacing. My heart pounded as we heard the creature emerge from the shadows. "I'm grabbing my rifle," Bruce shouted as he ran towards his tent. But the creature let out a howl so deafening that it brought us all to our knees, wincing in pain. The sound seemed to pierce through the very fabric of the night, leaving an eerie silence in its wake. I slowly looked up, bracing myself to face the beast that I was certain would attack and kill us. It resembled a wolf, a gray wolf, but it was massive and stood on its hind legs. The creature was no shorter than 8 feet tall, and I could see huge fangs with saliva glistening in the moonlight, dripping onto the ground. Its eyes burned with a feral intensity, and its fur bristled as it growled, sending shivers down my spine. The creature took a step closer, and that's when Bruce fired. He fired again and again, but then there was silence. I opened my eyes to see the creature still standing there, unscathed. It let out another bone-chilling howl before sprinting in our direction with terrifying speed. My friends and I aren't dumb. We took off running towards our trucks. My heart raced with fear as we ran, the creature's footsteps pounding in the ground behind us, growing louder with each passing second. I could hear its breath, ragged and menacing as it closed in on us. The pounding of my heart reverberated throughout my ears, almost drowning out the sounds of our frantic escape. I glanced back and saw it gaining on us with tremendous intensity. Its eyes glowed with malevolent hatred as it clawed its way towards us. In my panic, I stumbled and tripped over a tree root. Henson quickly turned around to help me up, and just as I could run again, I felt an intense burning sensation across my back. I cried out in agony, but didn't dare stop running, the creature's growls echoing in the darkness behind us. When we finally reached our trucks, I fumbled with my keys, my hands uncontrollably shaking. I managed to get inside, slam my door shut, and lock it just as the creature lunged at my car. It pounded on my roof with such force that the entire vehicle shook, its growls and screams echoing through the night, sending chills down my spine. Then it jumped to the hood of my car, its eyes glowing with a sinister light. It started beating down on my windshield, each blow causing cracks to spiderweb across the glass. And I screamed as the creature's claws tore through the windshield, shards of glass flying everywhere. In a desperate move, I quickly unlocked my door and leaped out into the bed of Bruce's truck as he was pulling out. Bruce and Henson both sped away as fast as they could, tires screeching against the dirt. I stared in horror as the creature just stood there, still perched on the hood of my truck, its eyes locked onto mine. To this day, we don't know what the creature was. I know what I believe it is. We all agree on one thing. We'll never go camping in those woods again. The memory of that night still haunts me, and I can't shake the feeling that the creature is still out there, lurking in the shadows, waiting for its next unsuspecting victims. A few weeks later, I couldn't get the experience out of my mind, so I decided to do some research. I found old legends and folklore about the area, speaking of a beast that roamed the woods, a creature that was neither man nor animal. Locals call it the Wendigo, a spirit of the wilderness that preyed on those who ventured too deep into its territory. The stories described it as a cursed being, transformed by its insatiable hunger and thirst for blood. I shared my findings with my friends, and we all felt a shiver run down our spines. The descriptions matched what we had seen that night, down to the last horrifying detail. We realized how close we had come to becoming another story in the local folklore, another set of names whispered around campfires. The thought of that creature, still lurking out in the woods, waiting for its next prey, was too much to bear. We made a pact never to speak of that night again, hoping that by staying silent, we could somehow escape its grasp. The silence was our shield, a fragile barrier between the terror that stalked the shadows. But every now and then, when the wind howls through the trees, I can't help but remember those glowing eyes and the terror we felt. The Wendigo is still out there, somewhere in the dark, waiting. And sometimes, late at night, I wonder if it still remembers us too. The thought sends a chill down my spine, making me question whether silence is enough to keep the darkness at bay.